Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 200th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. Yes, can you believe it? 200 episodes and nearly 4 years into the podcast. So this week's episode is a celebration. And to join me in celebrating is the person who encouraged me to start a podcast and has showed me unwavering support, someone I owe a lot to. And that's Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. He's the world authority on evidence-based inclusion in the workplace. His consultancy provides research, training, and consulting to make organizations inclusive. He's a doctor as he has a PhD from the London School of Economics, and this allows him to combine professional expertise with the academic rigor that his clients expect. And these include Aviva Insurance, Sony Pictures, Conde Nast, John Lewis, Natwest Bank and Meta. He is the host of The Element of Inclusion, a weekly podcast that informs and educates using applied research and thought leadership. And if you haven't listened to it, please check it out. And Dr. Jonathan has been featured in the Financial Times, Bloomberg and BBC News. He's a prolific writer and he's on a mission to help 1 million people to make their workplace inclusive through his writing, courses and other resources. So such a joy to have him with us today. And we've also got a special something for you as listeners, so do keep listening to the whole episode. And Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Layla. It's been a long time coming. I've been looking forward to it, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Oh, we are so excited to have you. And of course, I just read out your bio, but I think it's really lovely for listeners to hear. What are you working on at the moment?
Oh, what am I working on? Lots of things. Well, I'm prolific on social media at the moment. I've got a daily writing habit. I write every single day. So I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Writing is a huge part of that. I've also got a podcast, which you know, which we can get into all of that stuff. But the main thing that I'm really working on is pushing out my message about inclusion, evidence-based inclusion, and giving people practical tips, inspiration, and advice to do that. But the key thing I've spent a lot of time on is the writing, definitely.
And yeah, if you haven't checked that out, listeners, please have a look at Dr. Jonathan's work. As he said, he's prolific on LinkedIn and he has a group. So what makes you passionate then specifically about evidence-based inclusion? Because I know that's your niche. You've just talked about it. What is it about evidence-based inclusion for you?
I think it's in line with the way I just approach things in general. I now call it evidence-based inclusion, but in truth, it's something I was doing anyway, but I didn't have a label for it. And I know a lot of people, when they come into this space or they're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, work, there are words to describe things you've been feeling for a while, right? That's how I feel about evidence-based inclusion. So it's worth mentioning, I didn't dream of working in this space. It wasn't an aspiration of mine at all. So the whole reason I even started this stuff was, I'm trying to count how many years ago it was, but it was 2009, okay? 2009, I was at the Obama inauguration and I was massively inspired, like everyone else. We were all inspired. We were all watching from across the pond, but I actually made it to the other side of the pond. I made it there. A friend of mine, his mum invited me there, came back to the UK, and I was working as a chartered accountant. And what happened was I had Accountancy magazine, which I'm looking at Layla's face. She's so excited about what Accountancy magazine would be like. Yeah, it was that boring, but it had a picture of Obama on it. And I was like, okay. And then it was talking about the lack of Black accountants in the UK. I was like, okay. Now, I used to work in, what we'd call probably legacy media, old media. So all the media owners in the UK either were clients or I worked with them or for them. And I also used to be an auditor. So I realized that I hadn't really met many Black accountants. So I called the big 4 accounting practices, said, hey, this is what I've read. I called my accounting body, told them, hey, this is what I've read. And no one had an answer. They thought I was a journalist. And what happened was I was so curious, it started me on a path where I ended up trying to investigate these things for myself. So that's part of the passion idea. I wanted to understand is this true? What's going on? And so I did a PhD, ended up doing that at the London School of Economics. And what happened was I basically had words, as I said, for things that I was experiencing, challenges that I had in my personal life. And through doing the research, I'm learning about other people's challenges. So now I've got a whole vocabulary and I've got an experience, I've got a lived experience. But what I didn't have any experience of at the time was helping people to do that. And I wanted to do that. When you get a PhD, you get one for making a contribution to human knowledge. I thought I wanted to make a contribution, which is why I started the podcast. But I realized, hold on, I've got all this stuff from the literature. I've got all this stuff from my own experience. I'm working with organizations. I tried to put it all together. And then it turns out that's what I now label evidence-based inclusion as being. So it's born from evidence-based practice. And it's all about making better decisions. So I want to say that to everyone. It's really about making better decisions where you work, what you're dealing with. And in truth, it's what does the literature say? What does your organization say? What do the stakeholders say? Whoever it is you're making decisions about. And of course, your own experience. What does that mean? So bringing all those things together is what we call an evidence-based approach, evidence-based inclusion. That's why I'm motivated about it. And you use the word passion. It's funny, Layla, one of the things that I think about, and I actually listened to one of your other shows, by the way, about 5 inclusion mistakes people make. And when people say they're passionate about diversity, I often think some people get to be passionate about diversity, right? They pick this thing up and they can put it down. Whereas I was never passionate about it. It was more a necessity, something I wanted to understand and something that I wanted to change.
And thanks for listening to that episode. Any insights from you on that one? Top 5 inclusion mistakes.
It's fun. Do you know what? There was a couple of things. I wrote a few things down because I was laughing. It made me laugh. You talked about data javelins, yes, right? About the way people, well, they're trying to get a target. They're not really focused. So you talked about the challenges that organizations have collecting data. That was one thing that made me laugh. But the thing that really made me laugh was the one about family.
I'm glad you thought so.
Yeah. So as if you haven't checked that out, check that out. What Layla said, and regular members of your audience will already know this, but Layla talked about the challenges with organizations saying, we're a family, we're a big family. And there was a phrase you used, I wrote this down, positive communication policy. You said, most families don't have a positive communication policy. And I laughed because I thought it's so true. The other thing is, and you kind of touched on this. We've all been in this situation where, remember, there's someone who you work with, you really like them, they're great, then they leave. Maybe they were your friends, so you still talk about them, but it's like they were never there, right? Everyone forgets about them. So this term family gets thrown around a lot. That made me laugh. I agree, that's a problem. And that really struck me from that episode.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's something it really riles me. So good, that resonated with you. So thinking about this data then, and we don't want organizations to throw these data javelins. We want people to be thinking very intelligently about evidence-based inclusion. Why is data not collected and interpreted in the correct way? In this age of information, what's going on?
I think a huge challenge, and I'm sure other guests have spoken about this on the show. It used to be an insight, right? 3-4 years ago, if you would say you go to an event, and we've been at a couple of panel events together, and someone will say, you need more data, and everyone will start clapping. Everyone will think, wow, we need more data. Now, the truth is, in everything you do at work, you use data, right, to make decisions. And what do we mean by data is a useful question, okay? For me, it's anything that helps you to solve the problem that you are trying to understand and also to track that over time. Now, this is just a general description of that, but it's really important. So when people talk about data, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, for the most part, they're talking about demographic data. So let's confine it to that for the moment. They're talking about demographic data. We don't know who's in our organization. We don't know about them. So let's talk about things like race, ethnicity. Some people just don't want to share it. Like I've told you this whole story about, I've got a PhD, I did all this stuff. I don't like sharing that data. And the biggest problem for organizations, why they can't get people to share their data, is because people don't know what they're going to use that data for. And for me, and for everyone who's listening, so I'm a Black person, I used to think, I don't want to volunteer my ethnicity to you because now you know I'm Black and maybe you would use that against me. So think about what that means about the relationship or the perception that I have of the organization, that identifying things about myself will be used against me. So organizations who are struggling to get people to give their data, one of the biggest issues is, one, they don't say why they want it. Two, they haven't established trust with your employees, your stakeholders, about what you're going to use it for. And a huge issue, Layla, is they don't bother to tell you what they've done with it after they've got it all. So this is a really good tip for anyone who's actually trying to get data. Imagine if you get data or you try, look, everyone, please tell us what your ethnicity is. Please tell us your marital status, whatever that is. And then maybe 1% of people respond, right? Really poor response rate. You should go and tell everyone, we only got 1%. We can't really do much because we don't really know enough. And by the way, the reason we were asking, and you should have said that first, is because we want to do X. The idea about volunteering data and not getting anything in return, it doesn't even make sense in a 21st century context. Think about everyone here with accept cookies on websites. People, people are asking you, look, I'll give you a free report, information. In return, give me your email. So when your organization says, oh, tell us, tell us about the highest level of education of your parents, right? That's personal information. Tell us about, do you consider yourself to be neurodiverse? They're asking you all these questions, but they're not telling you what you're going to get in return. It's not a great idea. So this is a huge challenge.
And that's so interesting you said that, because I'm just thinking back to when I worked at Imperial College London and what we deduced. We didn't have exact evidence at the time, but we figured it was probably the white majority groups not giving their ethnicity because they felt beeped off by it. So that is interesting. And then, of course, your perspective around, well, what are you going to do with it? And of course, we know the way that data has been used against Black communities around the world. So yeah, it is very makes people very vulnerable. And I think people were very happy to declare at the time their gender, and it was binary, it was male or female, and age, actually. But religion, oh, good luck. Sexual orientation, no way. So absolutely. And we didn't say we've only had a 20% response rate, or we did maybe to some people, but not as an organization wide. It wasn't seen as a priority. So yeah, thank you so much. And the other thing I really wanted to talk about in terms of evidence-based, and the work that I do is centered around middle managers, because I think they're the real linchpin between managing upwards and managing their teams. And you've very eloquently and beautifully talked about resources that are disproportionately allocated to the C-suite senior leaders. So how do you think this can be readdressed, and why does it need to happen?
Yeah, so let's take a step back. And what you would realize, Layla, and perhaps what most people don't realize is, let me ask a different question. Have you noticed that whenever you're looking at articles, research, training in organizations, concerned with organizations, it's preoccupied with senior leadership? When I was doing my PhD, one of the things that I pointed out as a failure in the literature was it's preoccupied with people at the C-suite or at the very top of an organization. So when they're talking about diversity training, inclusion training, even, the unconscious bias training, it was always at people at the top, and it ignores the middle managers that you're talking about. And some people describe them as the frozen middle, the forgotten middle. We also have to remember that some of the people in the middle, they are the same, let's say, age or generation, even same experience as the people at the top. So they all came up together. Some people made it to the top, and the people in the middle are behaving one way. The people at the top behave a different way. And so let me go even further. Some people in the middle remember when you could smoke at work. Some people in the middle remember when there was no such thing as parental leave, maternity leave. Like, people remember when that used to either be, not a big deal, it just didn't happen. Women would have to leave their job once they'd had a child or were expecting. Like, that was, for all the audience, that was a normal thing, right? These people remember it. And so we're saying things like, non-binary. We're talking about the LGBT community. We're talking about race, but in a different way to the way that it's been explained or lived before. And they're now told that they need to think differently. What you find is people at the top get it because they're leaders and they have to. People at the bottom get it because they are actually diverse. If we think about major cities and large employers, they've got a very different experience and experience of the world, but also experience of media. It's the people in the middle who are often left out. And we identify that as one of the 7 common mistakes that organizations make. They focus on the senior leaders. Not enough is done about the managers. So I think it's crucial, absolutely crucial, to engage the people in the middle. And one of the key ways you could do that is actually making it clear about why diversity, inclusion is really important. And by the way, do you know what? Let me define these terms as well really quickly. So when I say diversity, I think of that as a management approach that recognizes that as individuals, we have differences and there is value in those differences. Okay, so that very much says that, look, we are different. It's not the same as equality. Inclusion is a systematic business strategy to ensure that everyone shares the same advantages and benefits. We always say everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. So when I say diversity, inclusion, that's what I'm thinking, right? And some people think, oh, what about equity? Well, we think an inclusive organization is an equitable organization. And for the most part, we equate that with fairness or organizational justice. These are useful and practical ways about dealing with it, as opposed to some of the philosophical ways that come up. So then the question is, how do we help these middle managers? Okay, you've said diversity, you've said inclusion. Well, one of the 3 biggest problems organizations have on their inclusion journey is they're not able to articulate what diversity inclusion means for their specific organization. So quick test, everybody. You've heard people say diversity is amazing, right? Inclusion's amazing. We need it, right? Can you tell me why that is good? This is a rhetorical question. In your specific organization or in your team, why does it matter, or how does it show up in your team? Most people can't answer that. They can say that the research says, the leaders say, I read a book that told me. They say all of these things, but they can't say it in everyday language that matters to them. So one of the things that I would encourage leaders to do, organizations, if you want to buy in the people in the middle, and this is for everyone, make sure that you can actually understand, why does it matter? Why is it relevant? Once you can answer that, everything else starts to become easier. So that's performance. That's one of the 3 biggest problems that we find with organizations on their inclusion journey.
Thank you so much. That's so comprehensive. And 2 things came to my mind. One is I had a very interesting discussion with an organization that said, we want to do diversity. And I said, okay, what do you want? We want behavior change. I said, okay, but what's the behavior now? What's the change you want to see? How would you know? Oh, good question. But we've got 4 key areas. We've got neurodivergence, gender identity, and I can't remember the other 2. I said, okay, what is it that you want to achieve? Well, can you just come to our team meeting on a Monday, 60 minutes, just bash it all out? And I thought, how on earth? You don't learn to read and write, or you can't go from learning to write as a 5-year-old or 3-year-old or however old you are to writing it. You don't then write a novel the next day from doing your ABCs. But it is interesting, isn't it, that people think, oh, DEI, let's go, we're done.
Just so true.
Not in the journey. Yeah.
And here's a scary story I picked up when I read a book, I think it was called Diversity in Organizations, and they gave a case study of an organization, and this is for the people in the US who are tuned in, Denny's restaurants. Okay. I've never been to one, but I know it exists, right? So as a chain, what they found was, and I think this was in the forgive me for the year, 80s or 90s, right? What they found was that it was institutionally racist. There were hardly any Black franchise owners. And this bit I struggled to understand, but they said that people who were Black were actually treated worse and actually paying more for their meals, something like that. I did a whole episode on it. It was shocking, right? Leap forward, they were announced to be one of the the best employers for people from minority groups in the US. I think they made the top 50 organizations on the Forbes list, right? I think 25% of their franchise owners were from so-called minority groups as well. That's a huge transformation, right? Layla, it took 20 years. It took 20 years. So for everybody who wants to, as you said, bash it out over a team meeting, okay, step one, but you've got several steps to go. And let's be clear, that's a transformation from being in a very, poor situation to a very incredible situation. They were able to do that in 20 years. Wherever you work, you could probably do something in a lot less time that's going to make a huge difference with people where you work. So it does take time, speaking to your point.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing that when you were talking about the people in the middle can often remember smoking at work when women had to leave their work when they got married, in fact, or got pregnant. We had this great discussion in my book group about it. Now, my book group is a fiction. We read a lot of fiction. We don't read diversity books, but we read some nonfiction. And I wanted to pick up on your book group and also the work that you do around reviewing books and using your 5-point framework. What can workplaces do right now to start to create evidence-based inclusion?
Well, one of the things I tell everyone is, one, start a podcast, and we will have a conversation about my conversation with Layla about podcasts. And two is to start a book club. Now, let's take a step back what's the point of starting a book club? Remember, evidence-based inclusion, there's 4 key areas. What the literature says, i.e. what the research says, okay? 2 is what the organization says. You're looking for data points, trying to understand things in your organization. 3 is stakeholders. And then 4th is expertise. I talked about your expertise, but it's also useful to leverage the expertise of others. One of the ways I do that is through books. So I read a lot of books, and going back to my PhD, remember when I told you that story about how I started the PhD? I was very insecure at the time. I hadn't studied for years, even though I'd done my whole accounting thing. I hadn't studied for a very long time, and people were using words. I understood the words. I didn't know what they meant. They had this whole different context. There were people who were just born, I want to be a doctor. And I was like, well, I'm here because I'm kind of curious. So I had no idea, and I was overwhelmed. And I came up with a system that allowed me to get a lot of value from books, a lot of value from research very quickly. And I always ask the same 5 questions. Why is this book important? Who is this book for? What are the key messages of the book? What are the key takeaways of the book? And other considerations. So why is the book important? That's so good, because if it's not important, don't read it. If you're not sure if it's important, don't read it. If someone recommends it to you and they don't convince you that it's important, don't read it, okay? Saves you so much time. Who is this book for? It's so powerful because sometimes books are not meant for you. That doesn't mean it's unuseful or unhelpful, but it's useful to understand the context. So I know that Layla co-authored a research paper once upon a time. Great. Now, the truth is, this is when you were at Imperial. I read that. That is a really good research paper, but it's not meant for everyday people, because those research papers are meant for other researchers. That's quite useful to understand. So understanding who the audience is, whether it's you or not, is very powerful. What are the key messages? Now, the key message is nearly always the same. So it's always useful to look at something that's relevant to the specific author. So if I've got a book on racism, right, or fighting against racism, the key message is racism is bad, right? Racism, we don't want that. So let's move beyond that. What's the actual underlying hidden theme that the author is trying to present to you? That's what I mean when I say key messages. Key takeaways are stuff you can actually use. And I prefer within a week. What can I take from this in a week? Can I have a conversation? Can I try something? That's what I mean by key takeaways. And then other considerations allows me to just think, okay, overall, what was the person saying? Were they biased? Do I even agree with them? Do I even like the style? What does it all mean? It helps you to get so much value from the book. Books that aren't great, it helps you to get more value. Books that are, super comprehensive, there's too much to handle, it really helps to keep you focused. So I would recommend you all do that. And getting back to the middle managers, imagine if you started a book club where once a month once a quarter, pick an interval that you like. You pick a problem that you have at work. Maybe we're having communication issues. Maybe a member of our team has come out, and what does that mean, coming out? What's all this? Maybe, what if you all read a book about it once a quarter, and then you ask those 5 questions, right? That improves the knowledge of everybody there. And we don't even now need to make it about your colleague either, right? You see, that was a crude example, but I think you get the point.
I absolutely do. And of course, we are at the celebratory 200th episode. And Jonathan mentioned the conversation we had. And as I said in the introduction, this is one of the key reasons I started the podcast, because of Jonathan's amazing support and encouragement, and saying, come on, Layla, you've got a message, get it out there, do a podcast. So I did. And we're offering listeners a little gift, a little offer. So Jonathan, speaking about books, book clubs, I wondered if you want to share what that is today.
I would love to, but can I just go back to celebrating? First off, thank you for inviting me here for episode 200, number 1. Secondly, Layla was one of my first authors. Or no, let me rephrase that. Layla was one of my first guests on my podcast. And in fact, I talk about book reviews and everything else. One of the books that I found most valuable was recommended by Layla. And I said that on the show as well. One more thing, so that you know the company that you are in when you're listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. I did a little exercise. I thought, okay, I want to understand who are the other podcasters out there. Like I said, Layla and we speak. I encouraged her, she encouraged me, which is great. I went to see, okay, who are the other podcasters in the world? Where are they? And I asked like 3 questions. And this was English speaking. I'm limited in that way, so I apologize. I'm looking for English speaking podcasts that are broadly around diversity and inclusion, that are over a year and have got a regular cadence, right? Meaning that when the next episode is coming out. Can I tell you that list was very, very short, right? First off, there were 50, then it dropped. When I started adding things, I think there was like 10, maybe 15. So what I'm trying to say to you is that the Diverse Minds podcast is one of the longest running DEI diversity podcasts in the world. And so thank you, Layla, for getting to episode 200. And please continue with all the amazing work that you're doing.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you, Jonathan. And honestly, I couldn't do it without our group, our discussions. There have been times where I've just thought, oh, this feels hard. And you've said, come on, keep going. What's your raison d'etre? So I can't, underestimate that. No person is an island. And we know from our collective cultures, that's, how we operate. And if you want to know more about culture, do check out the series on culture and what it means. So I want to go back to you, and I want you to share your special offer that you have for our listeners.
Yes. So do you know what? Where shall I start? Let's start with the book reviews. Okay. So in October 2022, I decided I wanted to basically do some book reviews, 60-second book reviews, just to keep things punchy. I'm talking about book clubs and reading and everything. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. So I did a 60-second book review using the format that I said. Who's this book for? Why is it important? Key message, key takeaway, other considerations. I did 30 in 30 days. And that was quite well received, all related to diversity and inclusion books. I've got a 30-book breakdown, which you can check out as well. Now, off the back of that, people said that they actually wanted to know a little bit more. Now, I already have a book club, so people can come and we talk about those 5 things, but people wanted to go a little bit further. So I did a little bit of research, as you could imagine. I spoke to people, and it turns out that people wanted something punchy, something relevant, that would draw out all the key value from the book. So this is when I decided to share my other tips that I use. So as well as asking those 5 questions, whenever I read a book, I take 5 memorable quotes, I take 4 stories, I take 3 practical activities. We're talking about the takeaways, 3 practical activities, 2 frameworks, and 1 critical perspective. And so this allows me to get so much value from a book, but make it practical, make it relevant, make it something that I can communicate to other people. And so earlier this year, which is 2020, I'm tongue-tied, which is 2023, we launched the Element of Inclusion Book Insights. So this is a paid offering where we break this down. When I say we, it's really me. I break down books all related to diversity and inclusion, and I just share that every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, you get a new book. Every 2 weeks, you get something that is relevant, that allows you to understand. And here's the thing. I thought that people weren't really going to be interested in the books, meaning, oh, okay, Dr. Jonathan's read this. He's given us a nice summary, but also he's weaving in all his key themes and all the frameworks and methodologies he's using around evidence-based inclusion. Great. I thought people would stop there. What I'm learning is people are using that, and then they actually go and buy the books because they feel that they've got more, they've got a guide, someone they can trust, someone who's curated it, which means that they can get more value out of it. And by the way, it's not all about agreeing with everything I say as well. What I find is if you're doing this really well, you'll say, okay, we like what Dr. Jonathan said, but he missed that, he missed that, he missed that. And that's the point, because you're biased, I'm biased, we are all biased. The thing is, I like to volunteer my bias so that you can use that in making your own decisions. So yeah, that's the offer. Anyone from Diverse Minds Podcast, if you are interested, get in touch. We'll have a special link for you. We'll have a special offer for you just to say congratulations, to thank you for supporting Layla over 200 episodes. We'll have an offer for you that you can't refuse that will help you to get involved and actually just get better insights, make better decisions, and top up your knowledge. And the reason why I think this is important, I know Layla thinks this is important. You did a whole show, didn't you? Was it 6 reasons why personal development's important?
Yeah. Last year for Personal Development Month in September. Yeah.
Yeah. So we already know if you're here, if you're part of this community, you already think that personal development's important. I think it's crucial. I would love to be able to support you on your journey.
So thank you so much. And yes, we will be sharing that link in the show notes. So do check that out. And so I hope you feel special. Hope you feel like you're celebrating with us. And finally, to end, the work that we do and the work, the lived experiences we've had take our toll on mental health and well-being. So I'd love you to share your top 3 mental health and well-being tips. What do you do to keep yourself mentally well?
Well, there's probably a couple of things that I do or something that I'm mindful of. Remember when I said that I did that book review from a book that you recommended? That was a book called Mental. It's actually got 2 titles or 2 subtitles, but they talk about a mental health toolkit, which I never really considered. And so it's 5 things, and I keep an eye on them. So 1 is exercise. 2 is sleep, like sleep hygiene, good sleep. 3 is stress management. 4 is nutrition. I know it's not in this order. And then the interesting one was relationships, personal relationships. So according to those authors, if you keep a handle on those, if you are cognizant, mindful of managing those things, it can have a huge effect on your mental health. So that was a huge takeaway for me from that book. So thank you again for suggesting it. That is something that I actually live with and take with me. I try and keep an eye on these 5 things. Where am I at the moment? And sometimes, look, we all have busy lives. Sometimes one thing slips, but I always try not to let it go too far. So that's one thing. The other thing I like to do is I like to watch rubbish things on, like in movies. Yeah, stuff that's got a really simple narrative that's easy to watch. I like being taken on a story, and I find that really important because a lot of the time, like I'm crafting a narrative, I'm reading all of these books, and it's work, but it's also I'm being very analytical and precise, and I'm trying to get through things. Sometimes I just want to watch something where, there's a good person and then there's a bad person and then there's a winner and everyone leaves happy, just something really simple. So I like that I find that very relaxing, actually, very relaxing. And I'm also a beach person.
Interesting. And which country beaches are we talking about here?
Oh, I love Brazil. I lived in Brazil for a while. I would recommend if you are a beach person, go to Brazil. I love it. I was there for a while. Incredible experience that I had there. That definitely changed my life. I've still got friends there. I speak very bad Portuguese, but it helps me to get around.
Oh, awesome. And so thank you so much, as always, for your time, your wisdom, your generosity. And if people want to know more about your work, I will, of course, include these in the show notes. How would you like them to contact you?
I would say contact me. The number one place, actually, where you can find my work is on LinkedIn. So that's Dr. Jonathan. I think it's LinkedIn/Dr. Jonathan or something like that. Same again on Twitter. That Twitter's J.A. Lamptey. But Element of Inclusion, that's the podcast, that's the website. Check that out. That's where you can find all of our stuff. But LinkedIn is definitely one of the first places to go to keep up to date with everything that we're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And please, if you haven't listened, please do check out Element of Inclusion podcast. And just want to say thank you so much, everyone, listeners, the community that we've been building over this last 200 episodes. It's been a joy, and we are going to be carrying on. So join us next week where we're going to be talking about friendships and mental health. Until then, take care, and thank you again, Jonathan.
Thank you, Layla. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm truly honored.
Oh, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.